Welcome to another episode of Your Money, Your Mission, the podcast designed to turn complex financial situations into actionable advice, powered by Johnson Financial Group. I'm your host, Kelly Mould, and today we're diving into pre-wedding conversations that can set the stage for a strong financial future as a couple. Joining us today are Becky McClelland, one of our private bankers in the Racine-Kenosha market, and Summer Nicpon, one of our marketing segment managers here at Johnson Financial Group. Summer is also preparing for her wedding this fall, so she'll be sharing some very personal insights with us today. Thank you both for joining me.
Yes, thanks for having us, Kelly.
This should be really interesting.
Yes.
So let's start with Summer. You're getting married in September, which I'm told between June is one of the most popular months for weddings, probably because it's so particularly beautiful that time of year, I would guess. So tell me a little bit about your upcoming wedding and your fiance, Blake.
Yes, thanks for having me, Kelly. So Blake and I are just a few months out from the big day. We met 10 years ago this fall. So our wedding's going to be a 10-year.
Kind of an anniversary from the first date.
Yes, yeah.
First meeting.
So we met in college, and we've been engaged for almost a year and a half now. And in these last final months, we are just down to the final details, all the small things to make my vision come to life.
Where are you getting married?
We are getting married in Delafield, Wisconsin.
Oh.
Yes, there's a beautiful venue out there, and the vibes we are going for is classy, elegant, black and white, super simple. Super excited to see that come to life.
How beautiful. And it's interesting because, I did a little bit of research because it's been a while since I was a bride or planning any of this, and that you have been dating and getting to know each other for 10 years. So getting married a little older than when people got married when, I was just out of college. So spending a little more time getting to know each other before you kind of go down that road, right? So it's interesting because when I looked at some of the research back when I graduated, people got married on an average, they were anywhere between 18 and 23. And now I'm seeing that couples are typically between age 28 and 30. Mm-hmm. So I'm not going to ask you how old you are, Summer, but are you in that range? Would that be?
We are both in that range.
Both in
Yes.
that range.
Yeah.
So 10 years to mature, 10 years to typically get more financially sound, which is what I'm going to ask you, Becky.
Sure.
So what would you tell a young couple preparing for a wedding, preparing for their life, as close to getting married as what Summer is?
Yeah, I mean, really start having those conversations as soon as you can. I think it really establishes trust and transparency and really sets the stage for what the expectations are going to be, going forward. Not only in the dating life, part of the relationship, but also as you get to move closer to settling down and, the proposing and the wedding planning. These are all important conversations to make sure that everyone is aligned with their goals and kind of priorities.
Mm-hmm. Right. And I'm assuming then you also learn communication styles and how to really navigate difficult topics. Summer, is that something you and your fiance have spent some time doing, I would imagine, over the last decade?
Yes, we have. And we actually did things a little bit backwards. So we own our home already. Mm-hmm. So I think that's one of the goals some couples traditionally have post-wedding. We've been in our home for about 4 years now. And so those were discussions we had to have early on, closer to 5 years ago now.
So when you purchased your home, was there a reason you decided to do the home first? Was it an interest, or did you find a property that you two just had to move on? What made you decide to do the home?
I think at that point in our lives, we had both just graduated college or recently graduated college, both started our careers. I was full-time here at Johnson Financial Group, and he had a full-time position where he is now. And we were both ready to get out of our parents' homes and start adulthood. And we were just at such a good spot in our relationship that we felt that was the appropriate next step to take.
And so I imagine in that process, you really had to dig into your financial circumstance, really kind of understanding what each other's values were and how you were going to deal not just with purchasing the home, but how you were going to deal with expenses that come along with a home and taxes and maintenance and all those kinds of things. Did you have a lot of those conversations?
Sure, yeah. Like I said, we had met 10 years ago and just purchased our home 4 years ago. So at that point, we've known each other for a long time and very well. So we were past the get to know each other, meet each other's family stages. And at that point, we were looking at what do we want our lives to look like, and they happened to align. I wanted property, home, family, later on down the road, financial security, and he felt the same way. So it was, we both want the same things. How do we get there?
Mm-hmm. And so when you were thinking about your wedding, were you thinking about saving for a wedding, having a debt-free wedding, or how did you come about figuring out how you were going to plan this celebration? Because also in my research, I'm finding the average wedding today costs between $30,000 and $45,000. It's
not cheap.
That's wildly different than when I got married. So tell me, how did you figure that out?
Yeah. So those numbers seem pretty accurate, and that's not something we knew right away when we got engaged. So when we got engaged, I did not have a clue how much it was going to cost to have this wedding. What we did know in the beginning was we wanted a debt-free wedding. Okay. So whatever that wedding looks like and how we're going to get there needs to happen debt-free. And that was our first step. Interesting.
So, Becky, what kind of advice would you give someone coming to you saying, okay, we've made this big decision. How do we do it?
Yeah, so starting with what you had said that you knew right off the bat that you wanted a debt-free wedding. I think looking at a realistic budget, first and foremost, just look at the financial situation is important. Have you been saving? Is there maybe going to be a family gift for this to assist with the wedding? Track some of your current spending and then see how you can start putting money away and start saving in that aspect, and what timeline will look like for what you want versus what you're able to save.
And it also strikes me, sometimes when we plan something as special as a wedding or a big purchase like a home, even a car, when it's your first car, there's a little bit of emotion in that. So people get very excited about these dreams and how it comes to fruition, and sometimes are less willing to negotiate with vendors and with prices. We fall in love with what we hear, what we see. So was negotiating a part that you would advise people to do, Becky? And Summer, did you do any of that with vendors?
Yeah, I mean, falling in love with the specific vendor, venue, whatever the case may be, I feel that there are ways to kind of adjust. You'll want to look at that plan and see, we like this venue or this vendor. Are we able to maybe cut somewhere else? Or again, kind of tying into the family gifts. Is there someone who can maybe help along the way with that? Negotiation isn't necessarily bad, but you don't want to break the bank either and put yourself into, a debt situation that maybe isn't manageable going forward, because then you're not setting yourself up for the best financial future.
Probably priorities, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So we, I'd say we did more negotiating with each other, Blake and I, than the venues. In the beginning of the planning process, I wasn't sure what the dollar signs were going to look like, so it was a lot of research, reaching out to all of the venues, all of the photographers, the different vendors, and getting price points to kind of, okay, it's going to cost about this much for a photographer. And then the decision we made was, let's stick in the middle. Let's not go with the over-the-top quotes that we're getting, but then let's also not get the cheapest. Let's say somewhere in the middle. And then where we negotiated was prioritizing what we wanted to spend on. What was the most important part of the wedding? For me, photographer was number one. So I was going to spend a little bit more on a photographer and maybe less on the DJ or the desserts or something like that.
So what was Blake's priority? Was it different than the photographer?
Blake cared about the food.
Okay.
Food and drinks.
My husband would be the same.
And sometimes people add DIY projects to make things done. Do you see that more commonly now, or did you have anybody offer to make
yes.
centerpieces or do things like that?
So that's in my very near future. We're down to the last few months, and it's the fine details, the centerpieces, the decor. And I am taking it upon myself to pull out the Pinterest boards and DIY some of it to save some pennies.
My husband has a physical fear of me going on to Pinterest. He said it always makes more work for him. But it is interesting because that's one of the things, if you've ever kind of perused the social media marketplaces or whatever, the thing I see the most are wedding centerpieces
Yes.
for sale.
Yes.
But interesting. There's different ways to save and
Yeah.
cut down. And I think your point about prioritizing what is really important to both of you first and then work from there.
Yeah, and two, don't be afraid to negotiate with the vendors either. If you know that you're going to be using the same vendor for two different things, if the video or the photographer can offer a videography type aspect to it, maybe just ask if we do both. Is there something, is there a price cut or a deal that can be made?
Right. There's not a lot to lose from asking the
Yes,
question, right?
exactly.
If you just feel comfortable about it.
Mm-hmm.
So I also know that, and I know you probably had this discussion long ago with Blake, but couples sometimes, there's the excitement and the romance involved in it, but the nitty gritty of saying, okay, how are we going to conduct our financial life?
Mm-hmm.
Are we going to have separate accounts? Are we going to divide and conquer the expenses? Like what's marital and what's individual? And I know that oftentimes young couples don't even understand the dynamic of whatever the law is in their state, like what counts as marital property,
Yeah.
what counts as separate property. So Becky, what advice do you have for folks when they come and say, okay, we're about to get married, what do we do?
Yeah. So currently, you will have your own separate account when you're
Prior
coming,
to marriage.
prior to marriage, when you're coming into a relationship, and even with you guys, I don't know how you necessarily did it, but if you start a joint account just for paying bills, or having those joint expenses without having the commitment of having to bring in together all of your money into one account. There's pros and cons to each of this. The pro of having a joint account for those types of expenses is you can kind of track where the money's going. You can track the spending within that account, and you know exactly what that account is earmarked for.
So there's some cons with this as well from having a joint account.
Yeah, so it can lead to conflicts, if someone is a spender and the other isn't, prior to having a joint account or being in a relationship where you're going to share money, you don't really have to ask, anyone for
Right.
permission, or you're not, you want to go and spend and go shopping, you could do that.
Well, and I would imagine as people are marrying later and you have a lot more time where you're working and you're living independently, kind of controlling everything and only responsible to yourself, that adjustment to all of a sudden having to talk about things together is it can be a little bit awkward. And so, and you guys know that in my past life, I was a divorce attorney. And it was interesting to me that the first most common cause of divorce that I would run across would be infidelity. But then right behind that was what people are now terming as financial infidelity, that they're just not communicating and there's one spender. And so then those common goals, kind of go by the wayside because you didn't really understand how people handled money and how you could kind of cross that bridge and communicate about it. But that's something you've had separate but kind of agreed on what you shared for a long time, Summer, with Blake?
Yeah. Buying a house made us kind of figure it out.
Yeah.
Those were going to be big bills coming in that we had never had before. So to this day, we have our separate individual accounts and then we have a joint. And that really works out for us because we both are full-time, hardworking individuals who spend differently, and then we have shared expenses, shared goals, shared savings, so we can contribute together, but then having that individual account.
But you had talked to me once about your individual accounts and said that you and Blake have very different hobbies and interests, right? And so,
Yes.
and as a result of that, so Blake's may be just a tad more expensive maybe than some of your hobbies.
That scale is just a little bit larger. His
So
you'll
tell
find
us
me
a little bit about
yeah,
that.
yeah. On a Friday afternoon, I want to go to Target, and he's looking for the latest and greatest expense off Facebook Marketplace, and those expenses tend to be different. And we really don't run into conflict or disagreements when it comes to our personal spending because of those individual accounts. That's your money. If you run out, that's fine. And if you have more than me,
It's
it
a way of
balances.
budgeting,
Yes.
right? Budgeting those hobbies, those separate things. But when you have, so you agreed on the wedding and then you had a lot of conversations about how you were going to, what you were going to spend and how you were going to manage the wedding, and both agreed it was going to be ultimately debt-free by the time you got through it. So with anything that would be a big purchase, car, house, when you decide to have your family, would those be things you would again reevaluate, talk together about what the expenditures would be? Is that how you handle that?
Yeah, I think so. And as of now, we are a 50-50 household, and that works for us.
Okay.
50-50 on the house, the shared bills,
Uh-huh.
the wedding, that was an agreement. Again, we've had many conversations over the years, just staying aligned with each other, that 50-50, we're each working partners coming in together. Looking ahead into the future, starting a family, I think those goals might be a little bit more complicated, and having a plan is something we definitely are going to need to look into, as I don't know that 50-50 is something that will always work for our long-term goals.
But at least you already are in a pattern of communicating really effectively for what those goals are. So if you had to change, it's in all likelihood you know how to have those conversations.
Yes.
So for individuals who maybe aren't in the same spot as Summer, where they've had some time to deal with debt, pay things off, and kind of learn how to jointly have goals and work towards them. For somebody who's just getting married but maybe bringing debt into that relationship, Becky, what advice would you have for them?
Yeah, I would say really start the conversation just knowing that you guys are coming from a place of understanding and wanting to align how things are going to be going into it. Because as you said, the worst thing is to go into a marriage or a relationship and all of a sudden you find out your partner has a huge amount of debt that you had no idea, and suddenly plans that you may have had for your future is no longer possible because you need to take care of this part of it.
Right.
So really starting a financial plan and looking at the big picture is never, it's not something that you can start too early. So
Right. And I would imagine, it would be interesting if more people did a financial plan prior to getting married, so they really kind of disclosed everything and knew how to get where they wanted to. And there are advisors who will do that for folks. So really interesting tool. I'm going to have to remember to tell all my children this.
Yeah.
So the other thing I find interesting is that, today a lot of times we have couples entering marriage and they're bringing a lot of student debt with them. And there's a couple of ways or numerous ways to deal with that. Like you said, create a plan where you're jointly blocking and tackling that debt and maybe putting off goals till you get that under control. There's other couples who I know say, let's keep that separate. Like we brought that to the marriage. Let's keep that separate. We can create a premarital agreement that keeps that separate and work on it. In the past, I think people had a really kind of bad view of premarital agreements. Like it somehow indicated that there was less faith in the marriage, when in fact, today I see more couples looking at that. That's just a way for us to make sure we're managing this in the appropriate way, and that our joint goals are accomplished, but with an understanding of which each of us are bringing, and they don't seem as negative. Are you seeing that more often as well?
Yeah, I would say the same thing. I mean, you think of a prenup or a premarital agreement and you automatically think you're setting your marriage up for failure. Why would we talk about this when we're going to be together forever? But exactly as you said, it's okay to talk about, the debts or the assets and things that are being brought into the marriage that maybe somebody worked for or inherited, and just a way of protection for yourself in the event that something does happen. Life does happen, and we want to have those conversations and make sure we're ready if it does.
That's interesting that you bring this up. I am walking into this marriage with some student loan debt, and that's my debt pre-Blake. I'm handling that, and that was an agreement. It's not his responsibility, nothing to worry about. When you say premarital agreement, is this something I should have written in stone? I mean, right now it's just a verbal understanding that we have that's part of my separate individual expenses.
Yeah, that's interesting, because oftentimes people go, we believe this is going to work. We're working really hard for it. But in the event something unforeseen happens, should we have to split that as part of the marital agreement? Sometimes people go, no, we knew what we brought. We're fine. This isn't working. We're going to take our debt that we brought to the marriage separately. But that reasonableness sometimes abates quickly depending on what's going on in the marriage that made it turn south. So this would be probably something more Blake would be concerned about, right? He would say, let's put it in writing so that it, so that we know who is really responsible for everything. It has the force of law then. Oftentimes people will say, I do it anyway, but let's put it down. If you're going to do it anyway, who cares if it's in writing, right? That's kind of the tricky part of
Yeah.
it. But I do think with the amount of debt sometimes that are coming because school, certainly college education prices have just skyrocketed, whereas when I graduated, having $10,000 in student loan debt seemed like a lot. It's nothing compared to what young people are bringing into marriages and have to deal with today, and it impacts their life. So I certainly can see why someone would say, if we're not going to, tackle this together, if we want to, maybe we are, but maybe in the event something goes wrong, we want to not have that burden, why you would want to have an agreement. And, one of the things you've done so well, Summer, and that I think just warrants a conversation to say, hey, do you feel like we should have this in writing just in case? Because I'm happy to do it, but I have no problem putting this in writing so we have this agreement. And we didn't talk about if Blake has debt as well. Sometimes, well, in my case, my husband and I, we came to the marriage with nothing. So we didn't have anything really to specify. We just said, we'll work towards this. But today is a different story, right? With people, marrying later and acquiring different debt. And Becky, is that something when you're talking to people, you say, hey, at least give this some thought, have the conversation?
Yeah, have the conversation and discuss specific concerns that you have. You brought up the school debt. That is something that some people, again, they've had grants, scholarships, family, anything like that along the way. Not everybody is in that situation where they can come out of college debt-free. Or again, as life happens, other things, may have happened and bills incur. You just want to be on the same page and just see, again, you don't want to have the conversation going into it thinking we're going to not make it through this marriage, but just to know, if something were to happen, this is yours and this is mine versus,
Yeah, right. But you're coming into it from a place of full disclosure, right? There's no, here's the debt, here's what we have. Should something happen, how do we deal with this? Just the better you communicate. First of all, the better you communicate, the less likely you're going to have a problem.
Right.
But it's nice to have that transparency. And if you start from a place of empathy, right, and not in just saying, look, this is where we are. We're going to commit to all this together. What is our stance on this? I've had other couples say, you know what, we had this conversation. We're combining everything and we're going to tackle this all together. There is really no wrong approach except for not disclosing and having the conversation. And then later, all of a sudden, finding it out, or finding out that there's a disagreement in how you would want to treat the debt. And then, being open about, what your position is on it, not being afraid to say, this is how I feel about it.
Yeah.
I also see this with couples who are marrying a second time, right? That they may be bringing more to the marriage and that there may be more reason to have discussions about what's marital and what's not. And the other thing couples sometimes don't understand is inheritances are typically considered individual property, but there are circumstances under which they're rare, but under which a judge might not deem it that. And so if that's something that's important to you, another reason why thinking about at least a premarital agreement might be in order.
Right. And while having these conversations, just reaffirm the commitment to the marriage and that next step. I'm just having this conversation just to get on the same page and see where your thoughts are on it. Not wanting to not move forward or anything. We're committed to this. It's just a good conversation to start off with. So again, the expectations are clear.
Right. And I think, so we've talked a lot about what you kind of have to discuss prior to marriage, but once married, and we see this all the time, especially with as busy as our lives are, and then you add children, and then you add just a zillion things happen. I reflect on my life when my children were younger, and I think, oh my gosh, for 15 years, all they ever heard me say was, get in the car, get in the car, get in the car, because life becomes so very busy. But it is important for, even if you divide responsibilities as a couple, to have regular check-ins, right? And to kind of reevaluate. Even now with my husband and I, we have these conversations, especially now as we're looking towards retirement.
Yeah.
And I personally wish we had talked about this much earlier as we were planning. So do you encourage people to have these kind of check-ins and to talk about both short and long-term?
Absolutely, because if you're setting the time aside to discuss your finances, your goals, it's allowing kind of that open space and that free time to talk that maybe you don't necessarily take the time to do, in your everyday life. So if you're setting aside the time and saying, what are we thinking for the next even year? I mean, there's going to be a lot of changes in the next year now that you guys are, or once you guys are married, and you start thinking about family and kind of what those next steps are. How do you get ready for that? But then also you want to make sure you're looking at the long-term goals, and, retirement is also something that is not, you don't need to.
It comes up faster than
Thank you.
anyone thinks.
Yes, yes, it comes quickly, and it's never too soon, along with the financial plan, to start looking at that and see what kind of retirement you want to have based on the lifestyle that you're living currently, and that will lead up to that.
I certainly think had I had some of these conversations in my 20s and 30s, I would have avoided some of the pitfalls, some of the errors that I learned a lot from, but allow me to continue working a little longer than what we had thought.
You're now wiser for the rest.
I am. So Summer, do you have regular check-ins? I mean, is there like a pattern where you discuss your finances with Blake so that you're always on the same page and kind of moving forward as things change?
Yeah, I wouldn't say they're monthly or set, but we do talk regularly. We are a very adventurous, active couple with always looking for the next vacation, the next purchase, the next home, whatever. So we are always having conversations. You still want to do this? You still interested? Whatever that may be. And luckily, we just are so... And we just communicate so well together about these kind of conversations, and it just kind of comes naturally. And I would say Blake and I are both financially responsible people, but we don't have a plan. So we have these conversations. We make sure our goals are aligned. But looking at marriage just a couple months down the road, I think some of those goals are a little bit bigger than maybe what we thought or envisioned. And so talking about it isn't necessarily enough. What's the next step, or what's the action plan that comes from that discussion?
To start a financial plan, maybe to look at those long-term goals and have a roadmap, maybe?
Yeah, and I think that's perfect. It's okay to ask for the professional help and guidance. This is what we're thinking, or this is where we're at now. This is what we're thinking and where we would like to be. And having someone who does this every day and can look at, from the outside, because you guys you're invested in, like we were talking about before, falling in love with an idea. It's okay to be in love with that idea, but maybe it's not possible at this time, and that's fine too.
Yeah, I love that. It appears Summer and Blake kind of both manage money, know where they're at, and talking about it. More often, I think I see couples like my husband and I, unfortunately, where he completely defers all of the finances to me. So I take care of the bill. Like, I have to force him into saying, here's where things are, here's what happened, here's what we're doing. And it's wonderful that he trusts me implicitly, and we're in a great place, and we almost never have any disagreements on money. But I worry if something happens to me, does he know where to? Now, I've given him all of my advisors' business cards and the attorney, like they're in his wallet. If something happens to me, you call these people, they will take care of you. But really kind of forcing that conversation is important, right?
Yeah.
Because I get why we have to divide it, and he's taking care of a lot of other stuff I don't worry about.
Yeah.
But that communication is key, wouldn't you say?
I would. And just to be in the know, you don't have to know everything to the penny or exactly where everything is, but just to know where to find answers and who to reach out to when that happens.
Yeah. And then it's interesting because, as I shared, we don't have conflicts about money generally ever. But I do recall one time, and I'm clearly the big spender, but one time I noticed a charge on the credit card where he had subscribed to the monthly car wash plan. And I'm looking at this and I'm like, Mr. Rockefeller, could we have a conversation about why but then I thought, that probably wasn't the nicest way to approach this expenditure, which really wasn't out of line, but it just was a little bit shocking to me that I didn't know this. So how would you advise someone to approach conflicts without maybe sarcasm, I suppose?
Yeah. Well, if the sarcasm works, that's great. But really try and stay calm and just avoid any sort of blame. So that way, if there is an issue or a disagreement on a specific charge or purchase, that you're finding a solution and not feeling like there's fault being placed on the other, because then that just opens the door for a whole lot more to be talked about, discussed, and possibly, a fight. So just be, flexible and compromise, because those car washes, depending on how many he's getting, those are important for him to go and have.
And
the
it
clean
was a
car.
new truck, and
Yes.
I just was surprised.
Yes, so be flexible if it's not something that, is too crazy or is not that big of a deal in the end. And then just, set clear boundaries and expectations for what those types of subscriptions may be for the future. Hey, gonna go get this car wash and I signed up for a subscription for it, or whatever the case may be. Just let you know, and just be, the transparency.
The communication,
Yes.
right. And Summer, have you ever had a conflict or have decided how you'd want to handle it if there was a disagreement?
Oh, sure. Being in the wedding planning stages, and they say, you're in the honeymoon stage. That's certainly true, but it is not all sunshine and rainbows. And we sure have had disagreements. And, with Blake and I, we've realized I tend to react impulsively, and he tends to make decisions impulsively.
Mm-hmm.
So we naturally, whether it is about our relationship or finances, when we find ourselves in a disagreement, we tend to pause and let's walk away from it. We'll come back to it later. Usually later is tomorrow. And that way that avoids the fight.
The emotion of the moment.
Emotional decision, the
Removes it.
emotional reaction. We'll sleep on it and revisit it later.
Yeah. And one thing, like when my husband retired, we kind of celebrated that milestone that he could do that, and that, he had worked so hard, and we were going to be fine with him retiring. Although he claims he's not actually retired. He just is a new boss, and she's not quite as nice as the other ones. But aside from that, we kind of celebrated that milestone. Is that something like you think is important, especially as younger people do things like buy their first house, get the first house paid out, start the 529 plan? Like, what kinds of things should people be really kind of acknowledging?
Yeah, celebrate the big and the small. For couples, because you have been together for a while before marriage, you have the home. For the people that are building to get the home, or maybe aren't quite as far along in the relationship as you guys are, if you're starting out a savings account together, celebrate that for a month straight you're able to put X amount of dollars into that account. No celebration or no milestone is too small to celebrate. Make it a big deal and be proud of the progress that you're making, because it's easy to get caught up in looking at how other people are handling things, and that might not be, the situation for.
No, couples are unique, families are unique,
Yes.
and you should, base it on your goals, right?
Yep.
So what final tips, Summer, would you have for young couples so that they have a harmonious, wonderful start and hopefully long years of togetherness?
This season of life, particularly for me, is one of the biggest and most exciting times of my life. I truly could not be more blessed to be where I'm at. However, it's also been very overwhelming and stressful from many different aspects. Celebrating those small wins and tackling in small bite-sized chunks, that's what keeps things manageable and avoids burnout in the end.
Right. And that is so critical, right? Because if we get more stressed, and I know my poor and wonderful spouse, who is a much better human being than I am, but he's also gets the brunt of my stress, right? And so to have that harmonious relationship, you have to recognize it and do things like you said, like taking a pause and, taking it a piece at a time, because things can be very overwhelming. And this won't be the last overwhelming time, but this is an incredibly special time. Yeah. What else, Becky? What should folks remember?
Yeah, and really, this is about the two of you at the end of the day. Celebrate yourselves and just make it what you want. And it's going to be a lifetime of remembering this day and, kind of, like you said, the journey along the way. It's going to be amazing.
And these are special times. So weddings are still important, whether big or small, and they just are really celebratory times for new beginnings. So Summer and Becky, all of your valuable insights have been so helpful. And Summer, best wishes for your upcoming wedding and future with Blake.
Thank you.
I love that I get to see all of your pictures on social media, and everybody's so excited in the family. It's just wonderful. And thanks to all of our listeners. We hope this helps you start your marriage on the right financial foot by addressing these important topics early. You can build a solid and harmonious future together. We wish you all the best in your financial journey as a married couple. If you have questions or topics you'd like us to tackle, please go to the show notes, type your question, and hit submit. Also, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss out on any future episodes of Your Money, Your Mission, the podcast designed to turn complex financial situations into actionable advice, powered by Johnson Financial Group.
This podcast is not a recommendation to buy or sell any investment or financial product. Whether our particular investment or financial solution is right for you depends on the facts of your particular situation. Please consult your own professional advisors prior to taking any action based on the content of this podcast. Bank services are provided by Johnson Bank, member FDIC, equal housing lender. Bank services are provided without regard to race, color, national origin, sex, handicap, or familial status.